Okay, so happy birthday, Vittorio Gregotti. Unfortunately, he died because of the pandemic last year. But he had a long life, as you can see. He died at 93, and he built a lot. And he did more than just building. So Vittorio Gregotti was born on the 10th of August, 1927, and died on 15th of March, 2020. Was an Italian architect born in Novara. He was seen as both a member of the Neo-Avant Garde. Strange, you know, it sounds strange, Neo-Avant Garde, because the avant-garde should never be neo, because in itself it is new. It sounds redundant. Anyway, a member of the Neo-Avant Garde and a key figure in 1970s postmodernism, well, 70s, early 80s, I would say. Gregotti was born in Novara in the Italian Piedmont and attended the Politecnico di Milano. He worked as a contributor to Casabella, an architectural magazine, and was its editor-in-chief from 1955 to 1963. So for 8 years, he was editor-in-chief of this very important architectural magazine. Gregotti founded his own studio, Gregotti Associati Internazionali, in 1974, but also lectured on architectural theory and curated several exhibits in Italy. His studio has designed several important sports venues and cultural buildings, such as the Barcelona Olympic Stadium, the Belém Cultural Center in Lisbon, the Arcimboldi Opera Theatre in Milan, and several university campuses, including that of the University of Calabria. His studio also designed Fujiang New Town in Shanghai, China, a new town with an Italian architectural theme. So, as you can see, quite an accomplished architect, not just in terms of building buildings, but also in terms of expressing thoughts in a theoretical form, which is important because most architects who matter did both. They built, but they also thought on building. And Peter Eisenhower, about whom I will talk tomorrow, did the same thing. An architect who is very successful today, I mean, these days, Greg Pasquarelli, who is the main designer in the group Shop in the United States, in New York, he was asked, what do you recommend architects and architecture students? And he said, on one hand, history, theory, philosophy, and on the other hand, the newest digital technologies. And I'm afraid we in Romania are not very advanced in either. And this is a big problem. Anyway, I mean, even the fact here that there is just one student in architecture attending and hearing this, you know, all the others are indifferent and they condemn themselves to marginalization, to not achieving their greatest potential. And this saddens me beyond measure, because just in Bucharest, there are 2,000 students, but from 2,000 students, there is only one here today. And I salute you, Sabine. Okay. Chiesa Madre. No, why is this Chiesa Madre here? I told you I had to do very quickly a presentation. Sorry about this. First, some pictures with a gentleman, with Vittorio Gregotti. Interesting thing here, there behind his sofa. Well, he was here probably close to 90 in a bourgeois setting, probably in his apartment in Milan. But again, we see this Baroque details in his apartment, which are rather interesting. Anyway, so here he was very close to actually getting sick because of COVID and dying in a hospital in Milan. Some drawings of Vittorio Gregotti. Italians in general, architects in Italy have produced a lot of graphic material, most of them, and most of it of a high quality. He was also, for example, in association with his name, the word territory shows up quite often. And this is because, like in this drawing, we see a concern with what we call urbanism, or even landscape architecture. And anyway, this view shows indeed that he was concerned with more than just building so-called objects. I prefer when I present an architect after showing a few pictures of that architect to show drawings, because then from drawings we will move to the built work. Now these drawings were done manually, of course. Casabella, the architecture magazine, where he worked for a good number of years and where he was also editor-in-chief, an important Italian architectural magazine. The Italians have several, of course. This is not a drawing, it's a model, but it's an interesting model because it shows that there is a certain theme here that can be observed also in his built work, and is this tension, the dialectics between the landscape and the man-made, and the buildings. It's a conflict, but it's harmony through contrast, I would say. And usually when you have this dynamic relationship with the between the built environment and the landscape, the results are often good because it's a dynamic relationship. Here he is drawing, sorry about those diagonal inscriptions. Again, seeing far away, territory. By the way of territory, there is a very intriguing contemporary architect, still rather young, Francois Roche, who has a website called New Territories. Try to check it out. New Territories, Francois Roche. It's a difficult website because it's very idiosyncratic, even neurotic, but interesting nevertheless. Okay, so he died, I don't know, in his 90s, and he made 1,600 projects. It was written on this Corriere.it. This is an image of a church, and unfortunately, this image is not identified, but you will see other two churches by him which are identified, and it's kind of interesting to see, to compare the three. Okay, Casas Forza. This is the earliest building that he built in 1953, 1954. Casas Forza in Stradella. He worked with, you see, another architect or two other architects. He was young, 1953. He was still in his 20s. A modest house in devastated Europe after the Second World War. but still interesting because of this, the sloping roof, which considering the two sides of the building, and the fact that the sloping takes place, differently on both parts of the building, is still an interesting, I would say, house. It doesn't matter, it is modest. You can do great architecture with even with modest budgets. I don't believe, as many people believe, that in order to do great architecture, you need great budgets. No, I don't believe that. I think a good architect can do good buildings even with small budgets. Because architecture is essentially about quality, not quantity. And yes, you would say, well, how could I achieve quality with a very low budget? It's possible. I think it's possible. I mean, even here, it doesn't look like a building that ravished the pockets of the beneficiaries. No, it's a modest building, but it still has character. And I think it's a good building. Now we arrive at, unfortunately, the English Wikipedia, from where I take my information, had very little about him. In fact, there was no list of his works. So I had to go to the Italian Wikipedia, and I don't know Italian, unfortunately, and even surprisingly, considering I worked for a few months in Rome. But anyway, let's hope we'll understand what it is about. So this is from 1972. It's a housing project, and I think it's very interesting. So he worked with Alberto Samona, another important Italian architect from that time, and I like what I see. It's not a building that says no to architecture. No, I would say it says yes to architecture. And I have to say that Vittorio Gregotti, as opposed to, in fact, many North American architects, he still believed in the wall, in the opaque wall, the solid wall. As we see here, I mean, there are two windows, small windows that penetrate the wall, but otherwise, there is a lot of wall here. And it's interesting, even the structure of the building. I think it's a good work. It's definitely architecture. You could say here there was an architect, or there were several architects. This is not just construction. It's not just a building, because the aesthetical concerns were addressed. I said this before, and I will say it again. There is a little book by a great and important French poet, Paul Valéry, and that little book is called Eupalinos ou l'architecte, Eupalinos or the architect. And in that, it's actually it's a short text, but there the question is addressed: who is an architect? And the answer was like this: there are three kinds of builders. There is one who puts a stone above another stone, and that is a builder. Then there is one who places a stone above another stone and makes them talk. He is a master builder. And then the third one places a stone above another stone and makes them sing. His name is Eupalinos ou l'architecte, Eupalinos or the architect. Now, this might sound too sentimental for us today. After all, who believes today in making the stones sing? Maybe only a mad poet. But I believe what Paul Valéry said was true. It is correct. I'm not saying necessarily that here the stones sing, but they certainly talk. And maybe here and there you might even hear some kind of an approximation of a song. Also, you have to notice the absence of finishes. This is important because I think a good architect does good buildings with as little finishes as possible. Just as a good-looking person who is good-looking because of the good soul within and the good spirit within doesn't necessarily need a lot of makeup, you know. And I think in art, whatever the form of that art, if you have something to communicate and that something is a value, then you don't need makeup, you don't need so-called finishes, you don't need plaster to hide the bricks and so on. Look at it. It's the, you know, the true material that asserts itself with its beauty, even if there are so-called imperfections, you know. And I like this. I think a building should have a certain honesty, and even if that honesty is brutal, I prefer a brutal honesty to a misleading sweet, misleading sweetness. Fabbrica Textil Bossi, Novara, 1983. Surprise. You know, after the work we just saw, we see this factory. And again, there is an Eupalinos here, there is an architect. If the architect was not there, we would not have had this interesting conjunction of various volumes that are attractive. And yes, this is what the architect does. Walter Gropius said, perhaps wrongly to an extent, at least to an extent, he said, architecture belongs, I mean, where the work of the engineer ends. So when the contribution of the engineer ends, architecture begins. I'm not so sure about this. I think plus there were architects, engineers who were also architects. But there is a little bit of truth in the sense that good architecture is about the immeasurable, not the measurable. And the immeasurable is the task of the architect. The engineer usually, but not always, works with the measurable. And I say not always because just 3 days ago, we had here on Zoom an American architect, an American engineer, Bruce Danziger, who became friends with us here on Zoom. And we talked for almost 2 hours. He is in Los Angeles. And strangely, there was another student, and there was this engineer, structural engineer from Los Angeles, and no one else from Romania. But with this, I'm accustomed. And Bruce Danziger amazed me and the students who was here with his unbelievable knowledge about art, about culture, about ideas, with his passion. And he's a very, very accomplished structural engineer. He was the second man in the most important engineering firm in the world, the Arup America. He was working with Peter Rice, a genius in structural engineering, and worked with some of the most important architects. And I was asking myself, and I keep asking myself, how come that an engineer from Los Angeles at 9 a.m. Los Angeles time with a family and even a young kid found time to be here on Zoom to talk with us as being, as I said, a student and me about architecture for 2 hours. Anyway, so there are engineers and engineers. A good engineer is himself or herself a person of culture. And he even said that he was invited to give a talk in München soon about structural engineering. And he said, I'm not going to talk about formulas and the specifics of engineering. I will talk about engineering and beauty. Bravo to Bruce Danziger. That's all I can say. So moving forward. This is the factory designed by Vittorio Gregotti. And you see, it's a factory, but it's still architecture. You know, you might like it, you might not like it, but you have to acknowledge, you know, the aesthetics that are obviously present. Nature always beautiful, and you know, you see the concrete, and you see the fragility of nature, and yes, the concrete is not doing a lot of service to nature and to pollution. I mean, it is doing a lot of pollution in the sense that it increases it. But I like the conflict, even the tension, the dialectics between the thin, you know, the presence of the fragility of nature and the massivity of the work of man. Okay, now we arrive at a very important work by him, Centro Cultural Lisboa. So it's in Portugal, in Lisbon, the Centro Cultural de Belém from 1988 to 1992. He built in other countries, not just in Italy. This is a massive architecture by all standards. And this belief in the wall, in the massivity of the wall, I would say that it is a trademark almost of Vittorio Gregotti. I mean, these are almost medieval walls, you know, in their opacity, in their massivity. They seem to express almost a non-modern attitude, although here we have glass, its majesty glass, but still in the equation between opacity and transparency, opacity is very present in the work of Vittorio Gregotti. I mean, even from this not very clear picture, from above, you can see the importance of the wall. The question of transparency or of the glass, there is a fascination with glass, but today I think we should question that fascination, because glass means loss of energy. During the summer, it is hot. During the winter, it is cold, and you need air conditioning. You need to pay for the electrical bills significantly if you have a lot of glass. At a time of sustainability, at a time when everybody is concerned about the climate change, the global warming, I think we should reduce the usage of glass. Yes, there is a glass that could ensure a high level of isolation, but it is very expensive. And I don't think it is through technology that we are going to solve the problems we have. I think we need also a change in our mentality. And the excessive usage of glass, I would discourage. But in the case of Vittorio Gregotti, as you can see, there wasn't really a lot of glass being used, at least in this project, but in others as well. Very massive architecture. Unfortunately, there are these rather convenient and thus problematic, you know, configurations which are influenced, perhaps almost at a subliminal level by postmodernism, and this bother me. But you know, they are only occasional and not predominant. It's an interesting architecture. and very different from again, especially the North American architecture or the British architecture and so on. It's very wall oriented and very massive with small windows. This is not typical of that time when it was built. Now, this is a project done in Venice in 1981. It's a residential project, perhaps for modest families and individuals, and not for the rich. An interesting project, and I like the fact that it has social concerns. You know, it's plus in Venice there is and there was this problem. You know, how do you build in Venice? Difficult city because of the history, the celebrity even, and how do you bring the new into the old? But I think he did an interesting work, and I think his work is better than the one done by Alvaro Siza, who also built in Venice. I like these housing projects, you know, because they show. By the way, Vittorio Gregotti was a communist. Now, of course, the Italian communism is and was different from what we lived through. But this is important to say. He was a member of the Communist Party and he was a communist. And as a communist, the concern with the social aspects of architecture were important to him, and you can see in this project and in other projects. How is this shown? I would say through these bridges, through these interstitial spaces, through the stairways which connect the individual housing units with a rather public space. So it's not just the individual here behind this square window. It's also the public space. And you can tell that this architect had an intention to connect the individuals, and there was a social concern. You can tell from the architecture he built. Even here, this corner somehow celebrates communality. It celebrates being together. Okay, maybe you know, not very explicit way, but to me it is explicit, because this corner, through emphasizing the dimensions here, seems to say I am approaching the public area. And you can tell this is an apartment building with problems, with graffitis, with you know, probably almost underprivileged people live here. But an important architect worked for them, and I salute. And even if there are so-called imperfections because of the usage, you can still see that is the will of the architect here, that there was an architect here. And even if there are infiltrations of water, and you know, it's still the spirit of architecture exists. And maybe this beautiful tree here salutes the spirit of architecture, you know. And I think it's a very good residential complex built by Vittorio Gregotti, probably again with little money, because this is not for the kings and queens of the world, far from it. Although the tree grows as gloriously and expresses itself as gloriously for the very poor and for the very rich, in just the very same way. And always the tension between the redness of the walls and the greenness of the trees adds to that dynamic relationship that I mentioned earlier. Even if you, let's say, prepare a dish, I don't know if you thought about it, but if you prepare a dish and on a plate, let's say a white plate, you combine chromatically in an engaging way. Let's say you have, I don't know, tomatoes and then some green salad. In other words, colors matter. And if you make a plate that is engaging chromatically, it's attractive, it's inciting and enticing, I think even the appetite has a chance to grow. Colors are important. This is what I believe. Now, you see an announcement that I found, Morto Vittorio Gregotti per coronavirus, padre del Zen di Palermo. We are going to see that project, another housing project. He named the father of the Zen in Palermo. It's a housing complex in Palermo that was called Zen. This is a stadium in, I think, in Bologna. And here again, you know, it's an utilitarian structure, but because the architect was there, monumentality is there, and you know, this stimulates, especially here in the corners. You know, it's a stadium which doesn't turn its back on architecture, but the opposite is saying yes to architecture. And it's not quite the typical stadium. Now, of course, the Italians love soccer. I mean, football, soccer, as it is called in the States. And, you know, to build a stadium is a great chance for an Italian. And even here, as you notice, the presence of the walls, in this case, these towers, you know, they show Vittorio Gregotti's interest in the opaque wall. I mean, there are openings here, but the wall still asserts itself with its specificity, being a wall, and in this case, even more, being a tower. Now, Nuova Chiesa Parrocchiale di San Massimiliano Kolbe in Bergamo. This is a church. You are going to see after this another church he built. Well, the experts, so to speak, they claim that he inspired himself from the public library by Gunnar Asplund in Stockholm. Well, there are certain resemblances, but there is a library, here is a church. It's an interesting church. Yes, it has, you know, it's symmetrical, it has something neoclassical about it, and maybe that's why it was compared with the public library in Stockholm by Gunnar Asplund. But it is Vittorio Gregotti through and through. Walls, again, massive walls. He believes in architecture in this way, through massive walls. Now, of course, this is not the typical image of a church that we are accustomed to at all. It's more like a temple, but we have to know that in many countries, the conception about ecclesiastical architecture is very different from the one in Romania. Now, here might even be a certain reference to, you know, some round temples or you know, spiritual places, even perhaps to the Pantheon. It does have force. And the interior is, you know, rather surprising somehow, because, you know, I look here, you look at this X, which is you know, a representation in a way, or a symbol of the unknown. I'm thinking also of the X in the ceiling of the Exeter Library by Louis Kahn in the United States, another emblem of the unknown. Now, this unknown, we could say it's about God. Iglesia de San Clemente in Seveso, 1991-2003. This is also a good building, where again the world is asserting itself with confidence. Personally, and I kept saying this, I am very bothered by the fact that in our country, the church doesn't understand that to not be creative when you do a church building means, in my opinion, sorry for the harsh words, means a betrayal of God. Because for me, things are not complicated. God was creative, man was made as a correlative of God, you know, resembling God. So if God was creative, the human being, the created one, should attempt to be creative as well. And I think the best way to honor God is through being kind of like him. Even Constantin Brâncuș, didn't he say, work like a slave? Well, he didn't say express, I'm trying to translate now. Lucrează ca un sclav, poruncește ca un rege, creează ca un Dumnezeu. So work like a slave, command like a king, create like a God. This is something that the Romanian church doesn't understand. And it is very, very bothering. And in my opinion, it is a betrayal of God, of what we call God. Because by repeating endlessly the same dogmatic image of a church is not honoring the creativity of life, of the world. No, it's not. Anyway, obviously, Vittorio Gregotti had different ideas, and so does the church there. You know, in Rome or any other city in Italy, in history, they employ the best architects, the best artists, and the most so-called avant-garde, the most creative ones. In our case, we don't even know who is the architect of the so-called Cathedrala Neamului. It is incredible to me. We don't even know. And there are good architects in the country. Why is it that they are not employed? It's unacceptable. And when you read about, you know, who built the great cathedrals or the churches in Italy, in France, in Germany, in England, and so on, the best architects are always the authors of the churches, but not in our case. Sad, very, very sad. I mean, this is not, you know, it's not, in a way, it's a modest church, but there is creativity. Look at the ceiling. It's a creative modern ceiling. It's just a part, you'll understand better here. It's looking upwards through this rift in the ceiling. But this is also a metaphor for the vertical dialogue, the dialogue between the human being and God. And it's done creatively, not dogmatically. University of Calabria. This also a very interesting work because he created this, there are two horizontal slabs, one for humans, one for cars. And it's kind of interesting. For some strange reason, it reminds me, but I don't know because it's actually very different, but it reminds me of walking by the side of the ocean at Brighton Beach in New York. This is a university in Europe, and look, you can actually walk from here to there, and it's quite a long, building, well, series of buildings. So it's a linear university. It's a linear campus with, I guess, all kinds of departments and faculties and so on. And you see no car here. This is beautiful. It's just a private peatonal, pedestrian boulevard for the students. It's almost like the axis of knowledge. It has a certain idealism because it is removed from the mundane entanglements of life as lived, and this is the street of knowledge. It has a certain idealism which somehow now spontaneously I connect with the Salk Institute by Luis Kahn in La Jolla, California. Again and again, we see the social concerns of Vittorio Gregotti, the communist. Because what else is this? This street is the street of communality, is the meeting place of those who study in all these buildings. They meet on this street. The street belongs to them. The street belongs to them as a commune, as a cooperative, as a group, as a collective group. And it is quite a relief, to see streets without cars. A rare sight these days. Milan, Bicocca, here he built a housing complex for the students, but he also built the headquarters of Pirelli. So this is for the students. I only have one image because when I search for images, they got sabotaged in a way for this work by the next work you are going to see, the headquarters for Pirelli, which is this on the Fondazione Pirelli in Milan, and it's I guess in the same area. I'm not so seduced by this kind of triumphalist architecture for essentially a capitalist enterprise, be it a bank or who knows what. He also built at least one bank. You are going to see one bank here, and I wonder what he felt, when he designed. When he designed the headquarters of a bank, being that he was inclined towards left politically and socially. Anyway, you cannot always, you cannot reject a commission just because of you still have to somehow honor it as well as you can, regardless of your political or social leanings. But this building, I don't consider it as being one of his best, exactly because of its triumphalism. It's too rhetorical in its glory and its symmetry and its height and its color, and I don't know. I don't think it's one of his best works, but anyway, he built it. Now, again, this part of the buildings is apparently, connected with the university. I am a little bit confused. And I was confused because I guess there are various functions for various buildings in close proximity. This is not probably the foundation Pirelli. Now, this is, let me see, another, I don't know if I have more images here, Centro Pirelli, research center, also connected with Pirelli in Milan. Sorry for the picture, it's not the most, I mean, that's what I found, and the only one. Now we arrive at the work in China. As you know, many European architects, and not only European, Japanese or American, or you name them, they build in China a lot. And China, I think, sorry for is missing an H there in China, or maybe, no, yeah, it is letter H is missing. I think China understood that it was important for it, in order to emancipate itself, to invite as many important architects from other countries, you know, to stimulate the architecture of their country. And often, I think there were good results. This is, you know, a model of the housing complex. You'll see some pictures now. This is also a particularity of the Chinese contemporary architecture, maybe not only contemporary, but very, very often they bring the water in the proximity of the buildings, you know, and water always adds something to the quality of architecture and the quality of life itself. So you see here, there is water all around the buildings. You almost say it's in some kind of a Venice, a modern one. So this is by Vittorio Gregotti in China, a new town. Many projects by the Chinese, I mean, in China, have this, this conjunction between the built works, the buildings, and water. And I imagine it's not an inexpensive, you know, activity to bring water so close to the buildings, but it seems they need it in this way. And if they can afford it, sure. Vittorio Gregotti is not totally away from a certain kind of rationalism. I think he was still some kind of a rationalist, but as a good architect, I think he moved beyond, in general, not always, maybe moved away from the restrictions that excessive reason usually cannot avoid. A sketch about that project in China. And this is the site plan. I mean, the site plan. Quite large, as you can see again, the territory. You can see again the fact that he was not just a creator of objects or isolated buildings, but also an architect of the relationships between individual buildings in a larger context, an urban context in this case. And you see the water, and yeah, I envy the Chinese for being able to bring water in the proximity of the buildings. This is Teatro Arcimboldi. I don't know. I know something about the paintings of Arcimboldo. Maybe it's Deli and Arcimboldi. I don't know if it's connected with the great Arcimboldo painter, but the theater, in my opinion, is a little bit rhetorical. Maybe also because of all that usage of glass. I personally didn't feel very attracted towards it. It also reminds me maybe too much of North American architecture. But I guess it's a good public space, gathering space, and if there was no pandemic, probably people would have still enjoyed it very much. But I don't think this is one of his best works, in my opinion. A little commercial in the way I see things. But now this work, on the other hand, is better. It's also a theater, the Grand Theatre of Provence in Aix-en-Provence in France. I like this view from the top. It's dynamic. It has clear relationships. The articulation of the parts of the buildings is done convincingly. And again, the supremacy of the opaque surface. In this case, the horizontal one, the top of the buildings, the terrace, which is meant to be accessed and accessible and to be used to work on. And then the staircases. And I think it's a good architectural configurations. There are still touches of postmodernism, which personally bother me a little, but all in all, I think he did a better job here than what we saw previously. And again, it is something in between architecture and urbanism, in the sense that there are various parts of the buildings that are connected with almost with a vision of an urbanist. It's not a single object. It's a sum of parts of buildings that contribute to a whole, which is almost like, like Palladio said, that a city should be like a big villa and the villa should be like a small city. Here is like it's one function, it's one building, but it has an urban quality. So this is in the south of France by Vittorio Gregotti. Now we arrive at that work that was already mentioned, and I think it's a good work, Palermo Zen District. Again, building for the poor. And I mean, look at here, it was war. You would say it was war, or it is war. But still the spirit of architecture triumphs, if this word is not too exalted, behind this world. Because with the exception of deconstructivism, architecture was often, if not always, concerned with organization, with order. Order in the word order is the word cosmos in Greek mean the same thing. Order means cosmos, and cosmos means order. And here we have order, even if it's there is variety in order. And here we have the disorder of who knows what. It's a piece of land here that is not yet organized by the will of an architect. But even if the architect was not there, there are people who improvise, who do sustainable projects, and I think this is a quality. This is a quality where if you allow people to manifest themselves, they can organize themselves, grassroots, and do interesting things, like in this case. Bravo to them. It's almost like a new beginning here, you almost feel like You know, there are gestures of giving a new change to this piece of plot of land. Yeah. It's a dense, very dense, you know, urban environment. Interesting work. I don't know why it is called Zen. Maybe Gregotti himself had the Zen interest. It's possible, or who knows why. Zen is about spirit, but and usually you wouldn't associate the word Zen or the spirituality Zen with a housing complex. It doesn't matter for the rich or for the poor. But look here, architecture behind, and then the disasters of consumerism in the front. Social despair exists everywhere, of course. Now, a bank. I mentioned that he did at least one bank. I know this one in Brescia, 2004. Again, it's the temple of money, right? And I don't know. To me, it seems to be a little strange that a communist would design a temple of money in this way. I'm not saying it's a bad building. It's just that it is too emphatic, too rhetorical, too assertive, too willful. And in a way, I think there is a connection between the triumphalism of this building and the misery of what we see here in the foreground. That, yeah. Anyway, this is what the architect did. The architect often, unfortunately, cannot avoid the contamination coming from those in power or those in authority. There is a complicity between the architect and those in power. Maybe that complicity is unavoidable, maybe even for a communist in Italy or not. The cube of money. Now, I end this presentation on Vittorio Gregotti with an exhibition design. He designed several exhibitions, most in Milan, and I think he was quite good. Look here, you know, it's a tunnel, and there are projections, and it's engaging. You know, it doesn't have, I mean, you know, the slab, the floor could have been a wall, inclined as it is, and so it's this deterioration of the predictable relationship between the horizontal surface and the vertical. Here we don't have an explicit vertical one, and horizontal one it is, but being that it is equal in this polygon in section of this exhibition space, it creates a certain ambiguity, which I think is excellent. Plus, these large, I imagine they are projections on, you know, this amplifies the ambiguity of the space. So there is something surreal about this exhibition design, which shows again the skills of Vittorio Gregotti. Because through such environments, you dilute or even delete the frontier between what we call the real and what we call the unreal. And so the dream world steps in. With such a project, he shows that he had the ability to move beyond rationalism. Thank you, and happy birthday, Vittorio Gregotti.